Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 14 of Coping with COVID. I hope you are all doing well and taking good care of yourselves. I love seeing so many familiar names in the chat and in our participant list. So thank you again for being here. And for those of you watching later, thanks for watching later. I appreciate that. I think by now we know each other well, but I am Elaine, and I have the great privilege of working with creative individuals and organizations all over the country to help them with the business side of their creativity, which is pretty incredible work that I get to do. This forum is educational in nature. It is not intended to be tax or legal or accounting advice, but you knew that. But it is a space to answer many of your questions and talk about some of the current financial issues that everyone is dealing with as part of the coronavirus crisis. So what are we doing? I thought this week there was a question that came in actually from a former student about motivation that I thought we would start with. And then we have a couple of questions about PPP and EIDL. So we will answer those questions. And then there was another question that came in about savings. So I pulled some data from Americans for the Arts, and I thought we would maybe take a peek at that today. And of course, if you have questions, throw them into the chat because I'll keep an eye on that as we are going through today. So definitely put your questions into the chat and we'll make sure to address them. Quick reminder, many of you listened to last week's session where I said that we would be going over the PPP EZ forgiveness application on July 6th. That is still the plan. So for next Monday, we'll just kind of go through that application together step by step in advance. What I would encourage you to do is get a copy of the application. The link was in last week's video, and I think it's repeated in this week's video as well. And then the other kind of key information you'll need is the day you got your PPP funds, so whatever date that is. And then you'll probably want to have kind of quick access to maybe your bank statements or information from your checking account or kind of wherever your money for PPP has been flowing, so that we can kind of identify and pull up some support to show where those funds have been spent. So that would be my suggestion. Go ahead and gather up your paperwork and your stuff so that we can go through that application together next week. And then that'll give us a full week before the following session on July 13th for you to kind of process what we talked about and ask any questions. And then that'll be our plan for the next 2 weeks. And then we'll plan to take a pause the last 2 weeks of July. That's the time that my family and I tend to sort of carve out for just family relaxation time. Normally we go on vacation. We're not doing that this year, but we are still gonna try to preserve that time. So that's our current plan. And then we'll pick these sessions back up in August, which is gonna be a really important time because for many individuals, that's when those extra $600 per week unemployment payments will stop. They are currently scheduled to expire at the end of July 31st. So unless Congress chooses to extend those benefits, early August could be a bit of a challenging time, especially for any individuals who are collecting unemployment plus that extra $600 per week, which is really making a difference for a lot of people. So that's our current plan. I hope that sounds okay to you. So PPP application forgiveness next week, and then another week to go through any questions that you may have had on that, and then a little bit of a break for you to enjoy some sunshine, and then early August, we'll get right back on track. So this is a question that was posed to me by a former student, and I thought it was worth kind of sharing in this space, especially because it really resonated with me, especially today as I was pulling this information together. The question is, anyone else just have no desire to make anything right now? And then the student shared that they're feeling some major what's the point kind of vibes, which of course is not ideal. So I totally feel you, and I just want to remind you, it is okay to not be making any work right now. It's also okay to be making work. It's okay to have pivoted and be making something that's not exactly what you normally do. And it's okay to not be making work at all. Kind of wherever you are, it's okay. I found myself today feeling a little bit of this vibe. And so I plucked my eyebrows and put on shoes, real shoes, not just, house shoes like I've been wearing for the past 3 months, and cleaned a bathroom. So apologies if that's too much information, but those are the 3 things that helped me feel like things were a little bit more under control, because I have a clean bathroom and plucked eyebrows, and I went ahead and wore shoes today. So I think all of us are trying our best to kind of do whatever we need to do to get through. And that means if you're not making work and you're cleaning bathrooms instead, that's perfectly fine. Or if you're cleaning bathrooms and then making work, that's okay too. So wherever you are, it is okay. Now, when it comes to PPP, a question came in that said, I apologize. My chat was blocking this. The question is about EIDL. So this is not PPP. This is the emergency loan that was available from the Small Business Administration, right? So separate from PPP. So this person applied for EIDL, which is awesome. And the question is, can I use the funds on whatever I want? And then they shared some examples: Producers Guild of America dues, production insurance, new computer editing programs, fees for an attorney, or maybe you want to hire a writer. Yes, 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 and yes. One of the beautiful things about the EIDL loan is that you can use it pretty much on whatever you want, which is fantastic, because this is remarkably inexpensive money. You're paying 2.75% to borrow these funds if you are a nonprofit, or 3.75% to borrow these funds if you are a for-profit or a sole proprietor. And you can use these funds on whatever you want. So yes, all of these things are totally fine for EIDL, which is pretty fantastic. And then this person also shared that the amount for them is $4,200 is what they were approved for. And the SBA defaulted to a 30-year repayment plan, which is the standard term for these EIDL funds. But you do not have to follow the 30-year repayment plan. There's an automatic 1-year deferral, so you do not have to make any payments for the first year, which is also kind of nice. And then you've got 30 years to make repayments. So $4,200 divided by 30 years with a 3.75% interest rate is not super crazy when we're looking at the monthly amount you want to pay back, and that is totally fine. I will share as well, though, if you do want to pay it back earlier, that is perfectly fine. There are no prepayment penalties associated with these EIDL funds. So if you find yourself maybe thinking maybe in the next 5 or so years that you could handle a larger repayment per month, that is certainly something you could do. And that means you would pay less in interest over time as that principal balance goes down. So my advice would be model it out over about a 10-year period and see if you could handle those monthly repayment amounts. And then that might sort of help you feel a little bit better just to kind of clear it out and get it out of the way. Or if you like 30 years, I'm okay with that too. Quick follow-up question that came to me privately in the chat. How do you figure out the amounts? Great question. I have a little Excel workbook that I use when I'm sort of estimating repayment amounts. And actually, I'm going a little bit off script, but what I'm going to do is go ahead and pull up that Excel workbook, and I will go ahead and share it in the email that I share with everyone, just so that we can have this. So let's see. The most recent one I used, I put one together for Joan Mitchell Foundation last week. And this is an example mortgage calculator, but really you can use it for anything you want. So let's change this mortgage to say EIDL. This person borrowed $4,200, $4,200. So we're just putting that amount there. And then this APR, that's the annual percentage rate. So for this person, let's put 3.75% in there. Okay, so if this person were paying this back over, I think this is a 30-year period, that monthly payment amount would be $19.45. This calculation in Excel, it's this payment calculation. PMT is how it works. And the first term is the rate. So I have it looking at this cell, that's 3.75% divided by 12, because it's calculated monthly, usually for your mortgage and also for EIDL purposes. So 3.75% is the annual amount divided by 12. So that's the rate. And then it's asking us for the number of periods. So this is looking at 360 months, which is 30 years exactly. Did you see me double check that on the calculator just to make sure my mental math game is okay today? So this would be the default option for your EIDL loan, 30 years. If you wanted to make it shorter than this though, like let's say you want to change this to a 10-year period, so 120 months, you can change that. And then it's looking for the present value of the loan, which is the amount you borrowed originally. So that's $4,200. So if we change those arguments and you change it to a 10-year repayment period instead of a 30-year repayment period, $42.03 would be your monthly amount. And then the way the rest of the data in here looks is it shows you each month all the way through 360, and then it shows you the principal balance going down, because basically this is showing you the starting balance at the beginning of each month, plus any interest that is accrued that month, minus the payment you make, equals your ending balance. And as long as you're paying more than just the interest on the loan, that ending balance amount will go down. So I'll go ahead and include this quickie Excel calculator in the notes for this week. It's not super pretty, as you know, but I am happy to go ahead and share that with you so that you can go ahead and make sure you can kind of see all that. And then play with the numbers and see what feels reasonable to you. Okay. Next question was about PPP. Someone wrote in and said that they correctly based their PPP loan application on line 31 of Schedule C, divided by 12 times 2.5. We're super familiar with this now. And then this person said as a sole proprietorship, they've been paying themselves the fullest amount in salary every 2 weeks. Do I understand that now the forgiveness is based on 8 weeks of 52, i.e., or that is line 31 divided by 52 times 8. And then this person shared that the amount is fairly different. Good news, yes, that was true, but it is not true anymore. So now you are totally fine as long as you choose the 24-week covered period for your PPP loan, which means you're going to use the funds over a 24-week period or up to a 24-week period instead of an 8-week period. As long as you choose that 24-week period, which every sole proprietor should do, in my opinion, then your maximum amount that you can pay yourself is that line 31 of Schedule C divided by 12 times 2.5, not the 8 weeks over 52-week limitation. So go ahead and keep doing what you're doing because you're doing it exactly right. I will say as well, there was a follow-up question, and it might be a couple slides in the future, about, the amount that's still left for this person, because they originally planned on an 8-week period. So they were paying themselves every 2 weeks to follow that 8-week period. But now it's sort of in the middle and there's some left over. So should you take the remaining amount and spread it over the rest of the weeks in the 24-week period? No, don't worry about doing that at all. Keep doing what you're doing, and you'll just run out of PPP funds before the end of your 24-week period, and that is totally and completely fine. Here's a link to that Form 3508EZ that we shared last week. This is the easy loan forgiveness application that will be applicable to most of us, most of the individuals on this call. Here's a link to it, and then here's a screen grab of the top. This is going to be a really good process for individuals, and I would encourage you to grab a copy of the instructions as well. They're not super long, but they are helpful in sort of walking through things. So as we go through filling out this form next week on July 6th, this will be a good thing for you to have handy. So this was the person's follow-up question. So if now they select the 24-week period, so they can use the full 2.5 over 12 months payment to themselves, how should they do that? They have been paying themselves every 2 weeks for the full amount, and they only have one payment left. Do you suddenly divide that out over the next however many weeks are left? No, just pay yourself one more payment, and that'll probably get you to like 10 or 11 weeks, depending on kind of how your math works out. So all that means is you will expend your PPP funds before the end of your 24-week period, and that's totally fine. You are allowed to do that, so that is perfectly fine. I will also say last Tuesday, so a day after we talked last week, additional guidance came out that said you no longer have to wait to the end of your covered period to apply for forgiveness. So if you are like this person and you have used all of your funds within, say, 12 or 13 weeks, then you can go ahead and apply for forgiveness for your PPP loan, which is really nice. Now, I will say there are not a whole lot of banks who are accepting those applications yet. In part, that's because guidance is still coming out and people are still kind of figuring this out, and there's not a huge rush. So I would encourage you to get everything ready, get it ready to go, so that whenever your bank does say, hey, we'll take your application now, you can go ahead and submit it. But there is not a huge rush. This person also asked the question, will the longer loan forgiveness period of 24 weeks start accruing interest in a different way? The answer is no, and that's because technically the loans started accruing interest immediately. So whether you're using a covered period, so a time period when you can use qualified expenses of 8 weeks or 24 weeks, doesn't matter. The interest is accruing, and that is all totally fine. Interest on PPP funds is 1% a year. Some guidance I've seen says the interest will be forgivable as well. That's what we're hoping for. But it's also possible that you may, have a small interest expense of, say, 3 months worth of 1% interest, which is going to be a pretty small, negligible amount. Another question that came in last Monday morning, I think, but it didn't make it into the questions for last week, was about disaster relief and PPP. So if this person is on the chat, definitely, let me just scan through names really fast. I don't see them on the chat, which means we might just follow up later. I want to know more about SBA Disaster Relief and what they're talking about. Because if they're talking about EIDL, which is I think what they're talking about, EIDL is not forgivable. So that means that's a loan that you just have to pay back. There is no forgiveness associated with that at all. Unless, and here's a big unless, and I apologize, unless we're talking about the application for EIDL that came with an immediate grant, right? And then maybe you decided not to accept the loan terms. So here's how that would work. The EIDL program you could apply for, and in addition to applying for some amount of funds, you also received a grant that came to you almost immediately or very soon after you put in your EIDL application that was tied to the number of employees you had. So if you were a sole proprietor, you would get a $1,000 upfront grant, right? If, as in this person's case, they are an S corporation, and I believe they have 2 employees of the S corporation, the 2 owners, they're a married couple, they would have gotten a $2,000 advance grant from this EIDL program. And after they got that grant, right, they could have looked at the terms, and maybe the SBA said, we'd be willing to give you an EIDL loan of, say, $8,000. And then maybe they said, no, we don't want the EIDL loan. We're just going to take this grant and take our PPP funds that we were eligible for and then apply for forgiveness for PPP and call it a day, right? If that's what happened, then that $2,000, basically, since that's treated like a grant, that reduces the amount of PPP dollars that are forgivable. Now, if you think about this kind of slowly, that makes sense, right? Because let's say this S corporation was eligible for, say, $12,000 of PPP funds, and all $12,000 is going to be forgivable. They got basically a $12,000 grant, right? Which is awesome. If they got $12,000 of PPP funds plus this extra $2,000 EIDL grant, well, that means they're going to get $10,000 of forgivable SBA PPP money plus their $2,000 grant. So then the PPP funds that they have to pay back would be $2,000 at 1% interest. In either case, they're still getting basically the full PPP amount that's totally forgivable. But if you get this extra grant, that just reduces the amount of PPP that's forgivable. I'm going to pause here for just a second because it makes sense if you slow down and think about it, right? But it's also stupidly confusing because there are all these different pots of money floating around. So if that is not clear, throw something into the chat and I'll sort of talk through it again. But if we are talking about the EIDL advance grant, that does reduce the amount of PPP funds that can be forgiven because you already got a piece of essentially tax-free money in the form of this grant. If we're talking about the full EIDL loan, that part isn't forgivable at all. You have to pay that part back over like a 30-year period, like we showed with the Excel document earlier. So then this person's follow-up question about the S corporation is it the same applying for forgiveness when you're an S corp? And the answer is basically yes. Within the instructions to this easy form, there are 3 different tests you can meet to see if you're eligible to use this easy form. And you as an S corp, I believe, fall into that because you have no other employees. The other ways to meet them are if you have basically maintained salaries and if you're relatively small. So the process should be pretty much the same when you're applying for forgiveness as an S corp or a partnership or a sole proprietor or an LLC or anything else. The trick is just to figure out if you qualify to fill out that easy form or not. Another question that came through was also from a former student. So shout out to the former students that are watching these. I really appreciate it. This person shared that before they were laid off in April, they had been working a full-time job as a designer almost every day since they graduated. And then they had also taken some part-time jobs here and there to boost up savings. But between rent, much of which was not paused for this person during the pandemic, moving costs, student loans, health insurance, etc., they're sharing that their savings are abysmal. And that is tough. It's really, really tough, right? Because even if some of our spending has gone down during the pandemic. I think we talked a couple of weeks ago, average household spending had gone down by about 42%, right? You're still spending money on rent and utilities and internet access and cell phone access and food and all sorts of other things, right? So your spending isn't going to go down to zero. I will say as well, depending on what types of student loans you have, there are options to pause your student loan repayments right now. If you have student loans from a private lender, that's not an option unless you talk to the lender, but the CARES Act did include some flexibility for making federal student loan repayments. But lots of people are seeing their savings really, really take a hit. And we see that from the data. Americans for the Arts, who many of you know and love as much as I do, they've been doing this massive survey of arts organizations and individual artists and creative workers pretty much since the beginning of the pandemic. And so the link there is at the bottom. This is their COVID-19 impact survey. And again, they've been doing it for a couple of different constituent groups. The one that I pulled this data from is the survey for artists and creative workers. And if you navigate to that section of the link and then click view the dashboard, you can see all the responses they've collected. And there's so much good data there. And what we're looking at here is a graph of the one question that was asked. And I just put this graph together so that we could see the data visually. The question was, how many months of savings do you have, right? And so people answered this through the lens of before COVID started, right? And there were, I think there were about 16,000 responses to this particular question and the survey overall. And we can see just over 5,000 people had no savings. Just over 6,000 had between 1 and 2 months worth of savings. So they had enough savings to cover 1 or 2 months worth of their expenses. And then a handful had 3 to 5 months or more than 6 months, right? Then we asked the question, what about now in the midst of this COVID pandemic, right? So the blue bars are before COVID happened and the orange bars are now in the middle of this pandemic. And you can see what's happening with this data. Almost twice as many people now have no savings. Why? Because they're using their savings to continue to exist and to get through this crisis, while unemployment has taken a while to kick in, while the stimulus checks have covered a smidge of expenses, but not realistically anything, and while pandemic unemployment assistance is paid out at a generous rate, but still a fraction of what someone might normally be earning if they were pursuing their creative craft in full right now, right? So we can see these orange bars, and now if you look at the people who have, say, 3 to 5 months worth of savings or more than 6 months, that's fewer than 2,000 people. And out of 16,000, that's a problem. So 25% of people now have more than 3 months worth of savings. And as you've heard me say, probably the great advice is to aim for at least 6 months worth of savings. And for self-employed individuals, I like nudging even a little bit higher than that because there is so much uncertainty. But the reality is it's really hard to save if we're not earning enough money to be able to save intentionally. And I think this will continue to get worse, especially as the extra $600 a week payments end towards the end of July, and as rent payments continue to be due, and as this continues probably for a relatively long-ish time into the future. So that's my summary and take on that. The former student's point is absolutely correct. She's watching her savings dwindle, and that's really, really tough. And it's happening to a whole lot of people. I had shared the link for the Americans for the Arts resources. I'll also share as well, someone was able to listen into Americans for the Arts webcast last week on the PPP forgiveness program and the EIDL program. Here's a link to some of the guidance they've been sharing as well. That came from someone else who has been listening into these weekly sessions. And the guidance here is fantastic. I'll also share they are also doing weekly office hours. So if you have specific questions, that's a great place to go for additional questions. So that was a lot, but it was sort of consistent with some of the things we've been talking about. The idea that it's hard to make work right now, and that's okay, right? You don't have to be making work. Or if you're feeling okay, keep making work, because it's amazing that you are keeping doing that. And we support you in that. We talked a little bit about PPP. Quick reminder that next week, July 6th, we will go through the PPP forgiveness application together and the instructions. So gather up your data and have everything ready so that we can kind of make that a really productive time. And then we talked about EIDL and the impact on that advanced grant on reducing PPP forgiveness, if that's your situation, or if you're someone who has taken an EIDL loan, we know that that's not forgivable, but you can model out your monthly payment using one of those calculators, like the Quickie Excel one I put together that I will share via email with you. And then we looked at some depressing and abysmal savings numbers, which means you're not going crazy if you're watching your savings balance go down. And you are not alone, you are not crazy, and that's going to be another challenge for all of us to continue saving together. I will keep an eye on the chat to see if there are extra questions you have thought of. And oh, here's a good one that just came into me privately. This person said, I mentioned EIDL can be used for anything. Can it be used to pay off debt? This person has credit card debt from their business that they were paying off right as coronavirus hit. Could they use the EIDL to essentially refinance this debt? My gut says yes. Although I would want to kind of read through the terms again with that question in mind, just in case, I think there's some language around use it for your business generally, but if credit card debt is from your business, then I think there's a pretty strong argument that, yeah, you could very easily use your EIDL to refinance essentially your credit card debt from your business. But I would just want to read the terms carefully, kind of with that question in mind, to make sure that would be okay. I imagine the EIDL rate is considerably lower than your credit card rate, unless you're in some sort of, 0% interest introductory offer or something. And if the debt is from investments you made in the business, that feels like it could be a really good option to me. So great question. And yeah, let's explore that more, because that could be interesting. I don't think you could use it to refinance your personal home, for example, or to take a vacation or something like that. I wouldn't go there. But if you can make a pretty solid argument that it is business-related expenses that you are paying off, then yeah, I bet you probably could go ahead and figure that out. Another question that just came through the chat. This person says, we're doing PPP next week. Awesome, yep. But they can't find their PPP loan number for the lender of the SBA on any of the documents. And then they got their loan through PayPal. That's kind of annoying. I'm sorry you were in that situation. And it sounds like you've already kind of looked through everything. So I wonder, my first gut would say, go back to whoever you were engaging with at PayPal. It was probably an email address, unless you had like a real person, and ask them for the number, because that's probably where I would start. And if you can get it before next Monday, bonus, right? Then you've got everything good to go. The other potential option, let's pretend that you either ask them for it and nobody gets back to you, or they can't provide it for some reason. The forgiveness application will actually go to your financial institution. So it will go to PayPal, if that's where you received the funds, or your credit union, or Cabbage, or any of the other fintech platforms. So your application will go to them. And then at that point, they should be able to kind of connect the dots and put everything together. So you don't have to apply to the SBA, you have to apply to your financial institution. So if you've got the paperwork that they gave you, right, which it sounds like you do, at least that will be a starting point. But I would say if you can ask them about it before next Monday, see if you can get the number, that could be a good thing. What other questions? Oh, you're very welcome, anytime. What other questions do we have? All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up our recording, but I will leave the window open in case you are still typing, or in case you have a couple of extra questions you want to talk about offline. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again. Thank you for the great questions. I can't wait to see you next Monday, where we go through the easy PPP forgiveness application. And I will look forward to seeing you then. I hope you have a fantastic week. Bye, everyone.